I caught my spouse faking a serious illness to manipulate me. And for context, I, 33M, was married to my wife, 32F, for 8 years. Our relationship was, at least on the surface, solid. We had our ups and downs like every couple, but overall, things were okay. We lived in a suburban home, had good jobs, and had a fair amount of social engagements. But about 2 years ago, things started to change. I first noticed it when my wife began talking about some mysterious health issues. She mentioned feeling fatigued all the time and had trouble concentrating. I was concerned but didn't think much of it at first. After all, life can be stressful. However, it soon escalated. She started seeing doctors, and each visit seemed to bring a new diagnosis. At first, it was stress and anxiety. But as weeks turned into months, it turned into more serious stuff: chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, autoimmune disorders, each diagnosis more severe than the last. She had a long list of symptoms, which kept piling up. She'd tell me how she was suffering, how much pain she was in, how she couldn't function like normal people. I tried to be understanding, to listen, and to support her through what seemed like a real health crisis. But the thing is, I started noticing some strange things. I remember one time, I came home early from work to surprise her. I had a busy day, and I wanted to make her feel better. I walked in to find her sitting on the couch with a heating pad on her neck and her eyes closed. She had this weary look, and I immediately rushed over, asking if she was okay. To my surprise, she jumped up, startling me, and said she was just resting her eyes. But the weird part was the heating pad. It was still warm, but she hadn't been sitting there for long. I hadn't heard her even move when I came in. I didn't think much of it at first, but the more I thought about it, the more suspicious it seemed. I thought maybe she was exaggerating her symptoms, and I began to do some research. Chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia are notoriously hard to diagnose, and there was no definitive test. I wondered if she was simply overwhelmed by life and trying to cope by making her illness seem more serious than it was. But I didn't want to accuse her of anything without solid proof. The turning point came a few months later. I was at work when I got a call from her. She sounded frail, almost like she was struggling to speak. She told me she was in a lot of pain and couldn't get out of bed. Naturally, I rushed home. When I walked in, I found her in bed, but she was not looking ill. She was on her phone, scrolling through social media, laughing. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. Finally, she noticed me and quickly put the phone down. She tried to act like she was still in pain, but I could see the discomfort in her eyes, the discomfort of being caught. I asked her flat out, "Are you really sick, or is this just something you've been pretending?" Her face went pale. She stammered and said, "What are you talking about? I'm really sick, you just don't understand." But I pressed her, telling her I had seen her acting completely different when she thought I wasn't around. After a long silence, she admitted it. She told me that she hadn't been feeling well for a while, but the severity of her symptoms was exaggerated. She confessed that part of it was real. She had some genuine health problems, but she had started faking it on purpose to gain sympathy, to get out of responsibilities, and to control my actions. At first, it had been an unconscious thing, but over time, it grew into something more manipulative. She had been using her illness to pull me in and get me to do things for her, like taking on more household chores, running errands, and even making financial decisions for her. I was in shock. I felt betrayed, hurt, and honestly, confused. How could someone I had loved and trusted for so many years lie to me like this? We had been through so much together, and now I felt like I didn't know who she really was. She begged me not to leave, telling me that she had been struggling with feelings of inadequacy and fear of losing me. She said she didn't know how to ask for help or communicate her needs properly, so she resorted to manipulation as a way to keep me close. I listened, but the damage was already done. I didn't know how to trust her anymore. This wasn't just about a few white lies. It was about intentional manipulation that had affected not only our relationship but also my perception of her as a person. I spent the next few days thinking it over. I consulted a therapist to help me process everything, and the more I reflected on the situation, the more I realized this wasn't something I could overlook. Trust, once broken, is hard to repair, and I felt like my entire relationship with her had been built on a lie. Eventually, I made the heartbreaking decision to end our marriage. I told her that I couldn't stay in a relationship where trust had been shattered so profoundly, and where manipulation had become the norm. She cried and apologized, but I knew I had to walk away. I needed to prioritize my mental health and my future. The divorce was messy, not because of bitterness or anger, but because of the emotional weight. I had spent years loving someone who, in the end, wasn't entirely who they had claimed to be. It took time, but I began to heal. I focused on rebuilding myself and learning how to trust again, not just in others but in my own instincts. I'll never forget that moment when she admitted to faking her illness. It was a wake-up call, one that made me realize that no matter how much love or empathy you have for someone, you cannot ignore manipulation, especially when it starts to erode the foundation of your relationship. I'm not bitter, though. I think it was a necessary lesson for me. Sometimes, love isn't enough to hold something together, especially when the other person is playing a game that you didn't even know you were part of.